We all know Southeast Asia, and the funny thing is, all of us coalitions, we all claim that we are most vulnerable to climate change. And I guess the whole planet is vulnerable to climate change. But since this is about ASEAN, please allow me to claim that we are very, very vulnerable to climate change. Owing to our long coastlines, densely packed and growing population that is really very reliant on agriculture, fisheries, forestry, and other natural resources. So all these climate change threats has been impacting on ecosystem, livelihood, and many other aspects of our ASEAN society. And these are facts that ASEAN, the association of 10 member states, are not blind to. In fact, there are some instruments that they have put in place in order to address these impacts. Before you go to get drawn to all the words, I would like to see where's the pointer. I would like to draw your attention to the ASEAN Multi-Sectoral Framework on Climate Change, or AFCC. This is a framework established 7 years ago, 7 years ago, in which the whole point is to address the cross-sectoral challenges facing the unified approach to climate change. Our colleague from FAO earlier was commenting on the misfocus of it seems that there is a lot of focus on crops. And this framework was designed exactly to respond to this issue of not just crops, but there's fisheries, there's forestry, and then there's also the environment people coming from the ministries of environment who are typically assigned to deal with negotiations in international governance frameworks, who are not directly connected to the sectors such as agriculture. So it's a hodgepodge of bringing together everybody, cross-sectoral, multi-sectoral framework. And guess what? It is somehow sort of a failure because structures are there. Perhaps we are still dealing with the way in which we go beyond the structures or divisions of ASEAN, of the ASEAN Secretariat, and each member states. So there was a failure because due to the lack of ownership and perhaps a lack of ways to go around the divisions that are there where cross-sectoral collaboration is being called for. But it is there, it is in place. In fact, the Swiss Development Cooperation Agency still supports this ASEAN multi-sectoral framework on climate change. Then there is also the ASEAN Working Group on Climate Change, which is under the Agriculture Division. Under the Environment Division, which is very separate from the Food, Agriculture, and Forestry Division. And then Mr. Srinivasan mentioned a bit on APCS earlier, so it's also another instrument of ASEAN to deal with the impacts of climate change. But this slide is focusing on the newly formulated strategic plan of ASEAN on this sector dealing with food, agriculture, and forestry, now no longer having an ambition of cross-sectoral collaboration, called Food, Agriculture, and Forestry Strategic Plan from 2016 to 2025. And here there are 7 strategic thrusts, 2 strategic thrusts that this network that I'm going to talk about is assisting. So I'm going to talk about the 3-year-old ASEAN Climate Resilience Network here, where some of you guys in the seat have attended. And I guarantee that it's always a fun meeting when we are having these meetings. It's established by member states to ensure that ASEAN is in a better position to adapt to the agriculture. The agriculture sector is in a better position to adapt to climate change and optimize its mitigation potential, have a common understanding, assist in the scaling up of these identified climate-smart agriculture practices, and suggest regional support strategies, and ultimately support ASEAN decision-making and implementation processes. It came from an idea of Thailand as a member state to, as a proposal to, okay, there are 300 ASEAN technical working groups in ASEAN. And this acronym, ASEAN Technical Working Group on Agriculture, Research and Development, is one of the 300 working groups in ASEAN. So there was a proposal forwarded there by Thailand, which GIZ decided to support, that led the way through the processing of national studies to identify what are climate resilient practices amongst the region, within the region. And this gives birth to the Climate Resilience Network. The ASEAN Climate Resilience Network implements the ASEAN guidelines on the promotion of CSA practices and what I mentioned earlier, the vision and strategic plan for FAF 2025. The roles are many. There is knowledge exchange, one of the primary tasks that we have been doing in order to build capacity. And all this knowledge exchange leads to policy recommendations. And none of these activities will happen without mobilization of resources. And none of this would happen without partnerships being established. Let me just share how this started so that you would see that it's really, it went through a rigorous process that could maybe provide an example of policy processes and how from the technical expertise down to the formulation of policies are done. At the beginning, there was a commissioned vulnerability assessment of food crops, value chains among ASEAN member states. This was really the proposal of Thailand to be supported. Then there were several consultations at the national level that identified good practices. And then there were a lot of regional exchanges based on these national consultations. And actually within ASEAN, everything has to be formalized. Nothing will move if it is not endorsed. The magic word, it seems, is endorsed. They have languages that says they are talking, and then the action point is noted. Okay, noted is the lowest form of consensus within ASEAN. I see you laughing. And so endorsement is the highest form, like, wow, it got endorsed by the ministers. So endorsement is what we aim when we're trying to deliver, to synthesize all these technical studies into a policy that holds some teeth. Endorsement is the word we want to aim for. So there's endorsement of these national studies, and where the ASEAN Ministers of Agriculture and Forestry, all 10 of them, looked at these national studies and say, okay, this is endorsed. And the next challenge is, we hope it doesn't gather dust in ASEAN, no? So we engage partners in order that these studies are not gathering dust in ASEAN. Just to backtrack, ASEAN does not hold teeth like the European Union does. When I say this, it means that there are no penalties or there are no binding agreements that involve penalties if you don't follow. These are just suggestions or prescriptions on how to do this. After the national studies, we went towards identification of priority practices that need support. This was compiled into a regional study, and from this study, there was a guideline that came out of this on how to implement these studies that came out. Visually, this is how it looks like. So all these materials were given the blessings or the endorsements of the ministers. So when you want something to move, you can cite that this ministerially endorsed policies and studies would like some parts of the government to move. This provides a mandate for some of the activities to be done. And I know there is some interest on what are these priority practices. Here, you would recognize the maps. And within this exercise of producing these studies that were later compiled into a guideline that were ministerially endorsed, all these practices that were decided to be priority by the countries came out on climate-smart agriculture. For example, you can see cropping calendar, alternate wetting and drying, stress-tolerant varieties. Insurance came from Vietnam. It was one of the unique things, crop insurance coming as a priority practice in Vietnam. Rice shrimp farming seems to be also only be coming from Vietnam, where the rest were somehow similar in their priority practices that they want to promote and learn from within the region. And then there are these red boxes that you will see. These are their identified, the countries identified in the formal meetings that these are the practices that they wanted to take a lead on and help other countries in promoting these activities. So these are some of the sacred text that comes out that got ministerial endorsements that took a long time after partnerships. In fact, Paolo, where is he? Paolo contributed to volume 2 through CIAT on climate information services, and this was recently, just last week, approved by the 10 ministers of agriculture. And we hope that some of you might find some lessons to be learned here or would be interested in supporting the implementation of the practices identified in this volume 1 and volume 2 of these guidelines that came out as a result of the work of this network. I want to share some of the ways in which we work. In one area, as we said, the ASEAN Climate Resilience Network work on mobilizing resources. Sorry for the small text, but the important thing I wanted to show here is cooperation. There was a meeting in Brunei, an official ASEAN meeting, in which the topic was, there we talk about how do we find resources in order to support some of the compelling needs that the region need in order to promote climate-smart agriculture practices. What are these? For example, packaging climate-smart agriculture technologies at landscape approach and agroecological vulnerabilities. Sorry for the small types, but what I wanted to show also is that this is in collaboration with World Food Program, CIAT, CCAFs, the ASEAN CRN, IRI, WOCAN, which means Women Organizing for Change in Agriculture and Natural Resources, the governments of Thailand and Indonesia. And this is a concept note that was prepared with the FAO Technical Cooperation Program, and I believe that this has gotten funding, successfully gotten funding for Thailand since this proposal was taken last year. Another example of collaboration is a demand that there should be a regional exchange to advance the use of climate services, which we have been talking a lot today, for agro-advisory. And there we identified potential supporters, and happy to note, and we'll share later, that this actually also came true. Another idea was on regional exchange on pilot agriculture insurance scheme in ASEAN, again in collaboration with partners, and this again happened. And the other best thing that we are looking forward to for next year is a scenario engagement process in which we test current policies toward multiple futures or climate scenario building. And this very much successfully got an 800,000 euro grant from BNP Paribas and Climate Modeling and Foresight. So these are some examples on which, just to show you that we have formal ASEAN, we have ASEAN Climate Resilience Network meetings attached to formal ASEAN meetings that yield results. Another area that we said we have been doing a lot is on knowledge exchange and capacity building on several topics, and not just on climate information services, which we heard a lot today, but really in general, promotion of the CSA practices that were identified today. And beyond regional exchange, we also have bilateral exchange or South-South cooperation. And what better way to show by pictures rather than by reading out the notes. So this shows pictures of Philippine Department of Agriculture visiting the Indonesia Department of Agriculture, Laos and Thailand having an exchange on stress-tolerant maize or corn varieties. And the next picture is also a very big knowledge exchange event on effective climate information services for agriculture in ASEAN. We really had a great time here. Some of them were here and was on the beach, and so we hope that we will see some of you in our next event. Really, it was such a great time. And it also yielded some fantastic results, which I'm going to show later. Another of these knowledge exchange event is, for example, was held in Ho Chi Minh last year, which is on the establishment of agriculture climate insurance. How do some countries like Myanmar and Cambodia, who are just starting their agriculture insurance schemes, set it up? And this is not just a gathering of government people and partners having beer at night and spending government funds. Actually, as a result of this, we really did come up with, for example, a 10-phase guideline in developing a national crop insurance program, which during that meeting expressed is badly needed, since some of the countries do not have yet the mechanisms to start their own programs. And I would like to say that this beautiful picture there of this handbook was given for free, not utilizing, for example, German taxpayers' money, and has gotten the beautiful word endorsed by the ministers just last week who met in Singapore. So if some of the countries would like to get some guidelines on establishing agriculture climate insurance, we already have this guideline. And some more publications. Apart from that, the ASEAN Climate Resilience Network was also instrumental in submitting the first ever joint statement of ASEAN on agriculture in United Nations UNFCCC processes. As probably most of us know, dealing with climate change, negotiations at international governance frameworks are often the arena of seasoned negotiators, most of them coming from the Ministry of Environment. And it was only during this time that we have really engaged the meeting of the seasoned negotiators from the Ministry of Environment and the agricultural sector. In fact, I would like to say that they were even forced to include agriculture in some of the negotiation. So one of the product here was the first submission, and a first joint statement of ASEAN agriculture sector to a negotiation process on international governance framework through the SABSTA, or the subsidiary body of the Scientific and Technological Advisory of the UNFCCC. So this is on the policy level. This is on engagement on global policies. And what's the point of this? This is in order to open up more technical and climate finance opportunities in order to support all the practices that were prioritized by the member states. And so there's also a lot of engagements with so many networks and partnerships, such as the Global Alliance on Climate Smart Agriculture, the Asia-Pacific Adaptation Network, and all of these resulting in policies. And so these regional policies would be nothing if there's no national level implementation. Our project also supported at the national level certain pilots or certain CSA practices. For example, in Cambodia, promotion of stress-tolerant rice varieties. And in Vietnam, there was support that was asked of us to help assess the agriculture insurance program, and we hope that the finished product of this would actually contribute to the next phase of the new program of the Vietnam Agriculture Insurance Program. And so these are the contributions in the research and innovation arena, and the studies and the reports are available on our website, www.aseancrn.org. And there you will see the assessment study of the Vietnam National Agriculture Insurance Pilot Program. And there was also a policy brief translated from this. And there was also a support given to Cambodia on the scoping study on promoting investments in the seed sector. This is in complementarity to the promotion of stress-tolerant rice varieties that's being promoted in Cambodia. And for your viewing pleasure, perhaps you would like to click on YouTube and see how this national level support in promotion of stress-tolerant rice varieties are doing in Cambodia. And in closing, I would just like to say, where do we go from here? Our network, I've shown you some examples of priority practices in CSA, how we work mobilizing resources, how we work in mobilizing, we work in partnership and not alone, and how we support national level implementation of the CSA in order to get regional agreements all the way to global agreements, utilizing opportunities that are there to strengthen policies and finance. So the road ahead is going to be built, unfortunately, when I think of it, of more and more meetings of countries, 10 member states sitting together to get consensus, because consensus is everything. And today, I think we've seen many technologies, many innovations to respond to climate change. But the real challenge, or the greater challenge, I think, is in approaching these challenges in a coordinated, well-organized fashion, merging the scientists, the practitioners, the policymakers to assist our farmers, our Southeast Asian farmers here. And unfortunately, these meetings will continue because this is how we build consensus. And at the ASEAN Climate Resilience Network, we try at least for it to be fun.